The big thing about sampling, you need to understand how to, I'm not a huge fan of warp, but I do find like this weird workaround that nobody really talks about is where, all right, so you want to make your first sample beat. Just understand that there's many ways to chop samples. There's many ways to go about sampling as an art, and you need to keep that in mind. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you one approach out of many approaches that you can do when it comes to sampling, and you want to watch my other videos so that you can get better at seeing like different methods that you can use with the sample that you're using. First thing first is to find our sample. If you're not on the main screen, if you're on menu or any other screen, all you have to do is just press main to get to this screen. After you're there, you want to hold down shift, hit menu to bring you to the browser. If you do want to use the samples that you downloaded to your SD card, then you want to just go to places, and then you can see that your SD card will fall under internal. From there, you can also set up shortcuts. I have many YouTube shorts that go over all these tricks to be useful in your workflow, and you can find that in the link in the description. It's very helpful. Today, I'm gonna be using the tracklib sample, so I'm just going inside that folder. If you don't see anything appearing, most likely it's either on program or anything else. You just wanna put it on the file so that it will show all your wave samples. You could go to the sample that you like. I like that. And before you press load, just understand that if you hit a pad and you press load, it will go to that pad. It will go to that program. Go back to the main screen. You can see it's on program 1. Now, anything that you assign or load, it will go to that program. And if you hit sample assign, you will see that all your sample will be right here, and then anything that's loaded in that program that you're in, and it shows right here as well. But off the back, I don't really want to start my samples on a pad, so I just hit this. Make sure none of the pads are green, and then I press load. This way, now you could go to sample, assign, and you can see it's in the sample pool, but it's not yet loaded on a pad. And then we could do shift and mute, and then you can hear our sample by hitting any of the pads. Now, you're probably wondering like, okay, I got my sample, but where should I start? Like, how should I find my chops? But just a few to throw out there. You can always find chops in the intro and the outro. It just depends on the track. Some tracks start off heavy with the drums, but most commonly a track will start off with no drums in the beginning and no drums in the outro. Now, to get more unique with your chops, you don't just want to just go to where you see the transient is at, and then you just count it from there. Like, if we start from this transient, 1, 2, 3, 4. You could do something like that. But a creative chop, to me, I just like to scroll and just hit the pad. See, that's one part of a sample that I just found just by skimming through, not just looking at where the downbeat is at and then just going right there. So let's get our first chop. I do like this beginning part. You can see that if you're zoomed in, it may take a while to get to the front or to get to the end. A faster way to zoom in is by using the plus and minus, because what happens is if you hit the plus, it will always go to where the playhead is at, the start. But make sure you're on start, because if you're on end, it's going to snap to the end. If you're on start, it's going to snap to start. With this sample, you can hear that it's live because it's not necessarily on beat, on the grid. So I could come in at a certain point, and then you want to hit pad 16 to find out if it loops properly. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Count bars. Like, if you're going to get into sampling and you don't understand how to count your quarter beats or your 8 notes or your 16th notes, that's going to set you back. So the easy way to count quarter beats is just 1, 2, 3, 4. And then when you want to count 8 notes, you want to be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And then 16 notes is 1 Iana, 2 Iana, 3 Iana, 4 Iana. And you'll hear that within the rhythm. So I could count 16 notes like 1 Iana, 2 Iana, 3 Iana, 4 Iana, versus 8 notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And then you have your quarter beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now when you found a chop that you like, you want to go to process and extract that chop. So extract is going to take out that little piece that you have. We could call this chop 1, or this chop. And then press do it. And this is good because if you want to get more chops out of your original sample, you could just easily go back instead of messing it up and then having to reload it. Now, I just want to assign it so that it just goes to the program. So you can see program 1, and then I can hit a pad, and then I want to put it on pad parameters so nothing else is affected if I do go inside this chop and want something else. Also, this is very crucial to your workflow. You must name stuff on the MPC. Like, you could get away on a DAW, but trust me, if you don't name stuff, it's going to get very sloppy. So make sure you name everything. So we got our first chop, and if we go back to shift and mute, we can see what the tempo is by our original sample. If it's a long sample and you can't really see the rest of the words, what I like to do is just click into the keyboard, go to any part, and just delete. Then you will see that it's an A minor, and you'll see it's 103 BPM. So then we could go to 103. If we want to keep the same tempo, I like the same tempo, so then we can press play, and our metronome is on, overdub, and play start. You could just press record as well. There's nothing in the grid view, so it don't matter which one you press. Let's just do overdub and play start. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you hear without the metronome, you can hear that little pause that's happening. And this is because, remember, I chopped into a weird part of the sample. I didn't just chop on a downbeat. So you may have those instances like that, but you just have to just bump up the tempo a bit. So let's go to 104 and see how that sounds. 104 is cool. Let's see 105. I like 105. Some may say, oh, it kind of speeds up at the end, or it don't sound perfect. And that's another thing about sampling. It don't gotta sound perfect. That little part that you hear towards the end is gonna be covered up with drums and the 808s. Now next, we could add some drums to get the vibe going a bit more. So we could go to track 2, name this drums. Now, if you're not using drum loops in your workflow, I promise you, you could be making way more beats and way more quality beats when you do so, especially if you're using Splice and then you're using some of their drum loops, because drum loops to me is just a modern day drum breaks. I like this workflow, man. I think it's very efficient. You don't always have to do it, but when you really want to get better at sound selection, like matching the kick with that clap or that hi-hat or that percussion, the easiest way to go about it is to load up a drum loop. So I could go to instruments, go to drums, and then I can pick out my favorite ones. But you can just hear. That one sounds cool. Once again, I'm not going to just load it on a pad. I'm just going to hit load first, shift and mute, and then it goes to here. Now what we can do next is actually go to trim so we can start chopping it. There's many ways to go about it. You can just do it manually and chop it in like that, or you could do threshold to chop like for every transient, which is like individual sounds. So you could have your kick, hi-hat, another hi-hat by itself, another hi-hat, open hat, hi-hat roll, snare. So you get the point. It does a good job at like just cutting at the transients. This is very good on drum loops, because if you did it on a loop, it won't work as well, because what threshold is doing is detecting the transients, and it's a lot easier to do that when you can just see it. And then you can also just zoom in and get a bit closer if it's not all the way there. But I also like to use regions, because with regions, you could get a unique kind of drum loop just by doing something like this. You could get more creative, man, because you can hear that it got the roll at the beginning with the kick. So that's pretty cool. From here, what I like to do is just go hold down shift and hit convert. Now, a lot of people mess up at this screen. You just want to go all the way to new drum program using slices. You don't have to worry about all these other options, because when you do this and press do it, and then you hit the main screen, you will easily go to the right and you can see the new program that you made. And then we could just record that in. Now what I want to do is actually solo the drums to show you something. Go to warp samples, make sure that you hit this middle button and put it on all so you can affect all the pads, and then you can also change the key and see how that sounds with a different key. So if you hear this, You can hear that it just snaps more on that beat. Then we can just bring in our 808. So we could go to our key groups and then shift the menu. Always shift the menu to go to the browser so you can just find the sounds that you're looking for. Right now I'm using the Unison drum kit. It's one of my favorite drum kits because they got so many 808s, so many kicks and everything. So one that I like to use is called 808 Cosmo. And I have a link in the description if you're interested in getting the drum kit or you just want to see what else it offers. So this one I can actually load onto a pad because if you go to sample assign, you're going to see that it loads it on every pad. To set up your 808s is a little process. It's nothing too crazy. You may feel like in the beginning like that's a lot, but over time it's just going to be part of the workflow. You'll get used to it. And I also have a more in-depth video on 808s that you can check out after this. So the first thing you want to do is just go to menu, pad 14. That's a shortcut to get to program edit. You just want to go to global and then you want to switch it from note on to one shot. Because with note on, you can hear that it just cuts off by itself. But if you hold it down, it plays the whole duration. It just depends on your workflow. For me, I just like to just mess around with the one shots. Then I could come back later on if I want to have that cutoff. Because you know, in other DAWs or sometimes when you're making a beat, the 808 will bleed into the next part of the sequence. This is a way you can chop it off by using note on. Then you just want to go to poly and put it on mono. And you can see I went to the global section so that affects the whole program. Then shift and 16 levels. And then you want to go to notes. And this is going to put you in scale mode. So whatever key your beat is in, you can easily access that. This beat is in A minor, like we checked before. And then you can bring up the octaves because at first it was playing low. So then you can hear now it's a lot better. So we're just going to put in a pattern. So now we have a nice loop going on. We can just name that. This is like the workflow that I like when it comes to the MPC. I just like to create loops and not just melody loops, beat loops, because once you have create your first beat loop, this is kind of like your main chop. So we can even call our sequence main beat or main chop. Let's just call it main beat. Now that we got our main beat, what we can do is actually go to the pencil tool in the sequence section and then copy that sequence over so that we can start building out the rest of our song. So we're gonna name this part intro. So what I can do is just easily go to the 808 in the drums and mute it. If you hold down main, you can see that all the tracks are named properly and you can find it a lot easier since you can't move it around. Like you can't put the drums right here or the 808s right here. It will be a whole hassle to do it. Now you could just have the intro play out like this. And the cool thing that I like to do while it's playing the intro, I will go back to the sequence one. And you're gonna see why I do that, just to see how it sounds going into the main beat. Doing it this way, I can make sure that my drums hit hard, that my 808 sounds good, that everything just sounds good. So if I press play, you can see that it's gonna play the next sequence. So you can hear that it is a smooth transition. It does bang, the drums hit, the 808 is good. But if you want to make the intro more unique, let's find a different chop. So what I like to do is shift mute, go back to the original, and we're going to find something. Now throughout this track, I heard like vocals. So that would be cool for the intro because that is going to give that contrast to your beat. So let's just find something that sounds cool. So I picked this chop. So I like this chop because it sounds like it's leading into something. So now that I like that chop, like I said, you always want to process it. You can just assign it from here and then just hit the next pad over because remember, we're on the chop program and our first chop is right there. We can just do it like that. But just in case you have an issue, if anything gets overlapped, you'll be safe because you already extracted. So we could call this intro chop. Do it. Then we could go to our intro chop, and then assign it to pad 2, then press do it. Now I can do record and play start to override it with the new chop. And you can see that this is set to 4 bars, but what I actually counted out is 5 bars. To hear if this all goes together, we use that trick. We press play and then we go to the first sequence. So that sounds good. And then it's going to be the same thing now. You got the basic structure now. We're just going to copy over the main beat sequence and we could just name this part verse. And then we just find a chop for that. So we can go in, shift mute, go to our original chop, and we can find something. I kind of like the way this outro sound. Now, you can hear that the timing has slowed down dramatically, but don't worry, we can do something with that still. So let's just process, extract that, chop 2, do it. And then we could just assign that to a pad and then press do it. Now, if we go to warp, this is a way where if something don't sound on beat, you could kind of like mess around with the warp. Now, I'm not a huge fan of warp, but I do find like this weird workaround that nobody really talks about is where you will put it on warp, but before you even touch anything, you want to hit this middle button and put it back to current because I don't want to affect anything else. Just this pad. I'm gonna put on warp. You can see that it says 105. Let's actually go back to the sample mode. You can see that the beat says it was in 140.19. Now this may get confusing. Because the beat detected that, I'm gonna actually keep that. I will go to warp, 140.19. Since it's not like a whole 4 bars or anything like that, it's very short, I could kind of mess with the stretch to kind of put it in its own kind of timing that goes with the beat. So the lower you go with stretch, the faster it'll go. And you can just hear off the back, it's sounding a bit better and closer to the original tempo. And then another thing, you want to take it off of BPM sync. So now I could make my own pattern and let's see how that sounds. See, that sounds okay to me. If you hear it by itself, it may not sound the best, but in context, it fits. So this is just a workaround to get really intricate with this. So we go back to shift mute, and then we play that original one, hear how it sounds. That's very slow versus now. And now since we're in a different sequence, we could switch stuff up, man. Like I could switch up the 808 pattern. So we could go in and just do something new. Kind of messed up at that part. I could just easily put that right there. So now I have my main beat, I have my intro, and I have my verse. You can continue to build out, switch up your 808 pattern, switch up your drum pattern. And then once you finally have all your sequences built out, what you can do is just go to menu, go to song mode. And this is why you want to name everything, because then you could just look and be like, okay, you want to press overdub or record, so you could just hit a pad and it will go there. So the intro is the second sequence, so I can start that off as the first one, then I could go into the main beat, and then I could go into the verse. And the cool thing about song mode is that you can see it's on 4 bars, but like I told you, a chorus is usually 8. So I can change this one to loop around twice. So that's going to give it 8 bars. Now, I have a whole video about exporting and song mode and arrangement, so you could definitely watch that next. But from here, you would just convert that into a sequence, and you can also export it, and it will be this whole song. You can see that it's 21 bars. That's pretty much it for today's video. Like I said, if you want to learn more about arrangement, exporting, and even 808 patterns, then I have videos on all of that. So until next time, peace.